Well, thanks, Jim. The industry that we're in is in a bit of a crisis. Things are getting a little better, but I looked at this slide and I thought this really kind of typifies exactly the situation we're in. Because we have customers right now who are really struggling with oil as low as it is, and the layoffs that are happening in the oil and gas upstream and downstream field. We see customers who are really struggling, and that results in jobs being lost. Over 500,000 jobs in our industry have been lost over the last 2 years, and the CEOs are right on the precipice there. They have shareholders who are still expecting increasing dividends and increasing growth in all of the capital that comes in and orders and all of that. And so right here is management who you are. And being in that position is very difficult. And so it's an honor to be here today because I'm in an industry which is right on the crest of the roller coaster. And we're feeling the pull of our shareholders, and at the same time we're feeling the panic of our customers. And we're trying to figure this out. And so I've titled this little symposium here, The Worst Case Scenario Survival Handbook. How are we going to survive? And so as I started this, I thought, what would be a good way to start it? Is there a book on surviving worst case scenarios? Well, of course you go to what we heard about, Amazon, and I found them. These are the worst case scenario survival handbooks. And it gets you through the worst case that you can imagine. So here we are, and in this set of books here, you can find out what to do if you're walking in the savannah and you step into quicksand. How do you get out of quicksand? How do you deal? In our industry, we travel a lot, and you're out there in Africa, in the Serengeti or wherever, and you see this charging herd of elephants. How do you manage to survive that dilemma? How do you perform an emergency tracheotomy? That may happen here. And how do you survive if your parachute doesn't open? Prayer comes to mind. So let's just take a little bit of a quiz here. How do you survive this charging herd of elephants? You're out in the savannah and you can't find a tree to climb because there are no trees in sight. The book tells me that what we're supposed to do is lay down and pretend you're a log. Elephants will step over you. They're sure-footed animals like a horse, and so they'll step over you, but the book warns that they are very curious. So cover your face because the elephant will kind of examine you with his trunk. And the trunks are rather abrasive, and so you don't want to flinch. Logs don't flinch. So cover your face and pretend you're a log. Okay, you're getting the idea. As I retired, we bought a home down in Sarasota, and I learned that in Florida, there's these anacondas that have taken over the Everglades. And so part of the survival handbook for Florida, in addition to dealing with larger and larger alligators, is to deal with these anacondas. So in the book, it tells you how to, what to do when you are encountering an anaconda that's that size. It can swallow a deer whole. So the anaconda will attack you, and the first thing it wants to do is coil around you. But when it knows you're dead, which is when you don't move or struggle anymore, then it starts to swallow you. The book says don't panic. It says the snake will begin at your feet and it will begin to ingest you. Don't panic. It says as it works its way up, slip your hand into your pocket, get your trusty Boy Scout knife out. You do have that, right? Open it up. And as it comes up to about your waist, insert the knife into the edge of the snake's mouth and rip. It will sever the snake's muscle and you can escape. Don't panic. So I'm thinking, okay, those are pretty interesting things. Don't panic. So it's now time for a little quiz for the ISA members here. We'll see how good you are. What do you do if you're being stalked by a mountain lion? A, run. How many for that? One. Okay, B, play dead. Oh, we got a couple. You can't vote twice. All right. Open your coat. We got 3 or 4. Sing a happy song. All right, yeah, I can feel. This is going to be a tough crowd, Pat. All right, the idea is what? Open your coat. Why? You look bigger. And so the mountain lion passes you by as a conquering foe. All right, now we'll see how you are in the political correctness area. What if you are being stalked by a mountain lion, but you have a grandchild with you, or a child? A, pick up the child. How many for that? B, shield the child with your body. Put the child behind you. Oh, there's a mother. Yeah, I could tell that. Shield the child with your body. Shield your body with the child. Yeah, some of you have had bad mornings, yes. D, run. Well, the answer would be what? Pick up the child because you look bigger. That's right. Okay, so there's these books, and it's the worst case scenario. And what we want to do is be prepared for these kinds of worst case scenarios, because we're going to face them, and we're facing one now. So this past year, with oil being at that time in the 30s, I had an opportunity to go to CERAWeek. And I wasn't particularly encouraged with that thing because there was a lot of doom and gloom. Would you agree, Tom? A lot of doom and gloom about the fact that oil was probably not going to increase very much, but they really kind of nailed it. They said that later in 2016, which we're in now, we would see a slight increase, and we have. We've gone from 25 to just about 50 on Friday. And in 2017, it might increase a little bit more, but there's no hope for gas. Gas is going to be $2 for a long time. So that's probably good news and bad news. And what I really appreciated about the CERAWeek, and several of you were there, is the depth and the level of the speakers. Wow. Dan Jurgen has this ability to reach in and pull some of the primary key decision makers from around the world. And so you can see we had CEOs there. We had a secretary for energy and GE CEO. It was really a wonderful experience. And so as I listened, they had as the speaker, one of the speakers, he was Al-Nimi, who just got replaced in Saudi Arabia as the energy czar. And so I filmed him. Well, actually, I just took it off their website. But he said some very interesting things about where OPEC is today. Because heretofore, OPEC controlled all the price. But here's what he said.
Distinguished guests, good morning to all of you. I would like to thank Dan Jurgen and CERAWeek for inviting me to speak. It's great to be back in Texas, although Dan only invites me in a crisis. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here today to set out why we as an industry have more that unites us than divides us. And I will highlight a challenge that confronts us all in coming years and decades. My remarks will cover 3 main areas: the international oil market, Saudi Arabia's oil policy in these challenging times, and the impact of climate change, which is very important.
So I'll cut it off there. He spoke for about 30 minutes. The takeaway was OPEC is dead. That they were going to pump as much as they could because they have infrastructure costs to cover. And I came away from that meeting and that listening to Al-Nimi with the understanding that we're involved in a global price war, and that part of the reason we're where we are is because Saudi Arabia doesn't want Iran to pump, and Iran doesn't want Saudi Arabia to pump, and so they both pump as much as they can. And the same thing is true with Kuwait and Dubai and so forth. And so the market is flooded because they are trying to keep each other from supporting their infrastructures. And so we've got this price, like the infamous thing, I've fallen and I can't get up. And that puts us in this worst case scenario, and I'm looking for a book on Amazon on what to do, and I couldn't find one. So we're going to talk about that, and I think we are at the trough and we're coming out of it, which is encouraging. So the fall in the price has fostered a wave of productivity gains, which is certainly helping our industry. When oil's $100 a barrel, we can have a lot of slop. And so the productivity gains have helped us to fine-tune our industry, and of course ISA is a big part of that. Many countries continue to make money even at these low prices. Here on this chart you can see what the break-even price is for each of the countries. So US, we, with our infrastructure in place, can still make money below $50 a barrel. And so your idea is to pump as much as you can. It may not pay to invest in exploration yet, but certainly we can leverage the infrastructure. This is a very interesting chart because even though the lift cost is low, the actual infrastructure cost of supporting everything around it is very high in many of the countries around the world. And so you can see here's Saudi Arabia. They need oil to be over $100 at their current OPEC allotted pumping in order to meet their social costs. And this has caused enormous change inside Saudi. Saudi Aramco is for sale if you'd like to buy it. Tom and I were trying to decide whether it would be the largest company in the world, and of course I think the answer is yes. It would surpass Apple by a mile. In fact, Tom thought that perhaps it would equal all of the majors put together and then some. So that's a fundamental change. But you can see the battle that's going on here between Iraq, Iran, who needs lots and lots of infrastructure in order to develop their country. And yet we see all kinds of terrorist activity going on in places like Nigeria. We see problems in Venezuela with that infrastructure under Chavez destroying that industry. And so that has brought into balance now the supply and demand. In addition to that, we have some interesting developments across our planet. Our developed nations are using less oil, where the developing nations are using more. But the net is more is demanded, primarily from countries like China and India. Recently, we see that India is on a tear. They are equipping a rapidly developing middle class with cars, with air conditioning, and the energy demands in India are going up faster than the decline in the developed nations. Certainly what we've been doing with our cars, they get better mileage, alternative energy sources. In Iowa, we have windmills all over the place, solar in the west, and certainly that's helping, but it doesn't account for the fact that globally we are still needing more. So what I'm looking at is that this worst case scenario has probably swung the pendulum far too far to the savings category. And what I'm particularly interested in for us in this industry is that there's an estimated $170 billion CapEx spending that's been slashed from the budget of 2016 to 2020. That's big, and that's hurting. And so in Little Marshalltown, where I live, where Fisher is the primary employer, we are in a recession. We've gone through 3 voluntary early outs where people at the peak of their career in their 50s and 60s are taking early out packages, and we're losing enormous talent. And we're not alone. Across the industry, I was asked to come to BP last year. I spoke at BP down in Houston on the I-10 corridor. There's this basic fear throughout the whole organization. Am I next? And it's a real problem. They're looking for a worst-case scenario survival handbook. So 500,000 jobs have disappeared and more are on the horizon. It's a scary time. And companies are failing at a rapid rate. In fact, as we were there at CERAWeek, and now I've seen recent reports in Wall Street Journal, up to a half of the E2P companies, the exploration and production companies that are upstream, are slated to go into bankruptcy in the next year. They were highly leveraged. They borrowed a lot of money because oil was going to be at $100 a barrel. I remember listening to the CEO of Chevron at CERAWeek the year before that said, $100 oil is here to stay, get used to it. And then it fell to 27. And so not even the CEOs of major corporations like Exxon, Shell, BP, et cetera, knew this was coming. It just hit us all blindsided. We all thought oil was just going to continue as it was. And so big companies are now declaring bankruptcy. I've been interested in Lin Energy. I don't know if any of you have, that's a shale play. I was interested in investing in that. It's now been delisted from the exchange. And Hercules just declared bankruptcy last week. And so over a half of these companies are now going into Chapter 11, trying to restructure their balance sheets, trying to figure out how to survive. In addition, there's these massive layoffs. There is no guarantee because you've been in business a long time, you're going to stay in business. We've seen this with Radio Shack. HP is on the rocks. Dell went private. And so I was interested in this statistic that I found. Of the companies on the first Fortune 500 list, 88% don't exist today. So just because you've been around for 100 years doesn't guarantee you can be here next year. Most companies fail. So I think we definitely need a worst-case scenario survival handbook. And I think ISA can help us write that book. Let's figure out how we can't be one of these casualties. So as we go on, I should have seen that video coming. That's why I have this thing up here. I was at CERAWeek, and I thought, all right, where are we? And on the last day, I thought the last day might have been the best day, they had these MIT analysts. They're not big names. They just work hard. And the MIT analysts are looking at all the big data, and they're trying to figure out where we are. And what encouraged me was we are right on the precipice. We're developing about 1 million barrels a day more than we can consume, but that's like 1%. So I'll play this video for you because it just captures it. Here it is.
One thing to remember about oil prices today is if you look at capacity utilization, global production capacity utilization, we're at about 97, perhaps even 98%. And just in a typical market, that would seem to indicate upward pressure on prices. Now, since we're at 97, 98%, that means supply is well above demand right now. But over time, as we shift from glut to deficit, and that will happen, we have a little too much oil right now. When we have a little too little oil, we can see prices swing upward by perhaps in a very volatile fashion and perhaps stronger than some expect, at least for a time.
So what's interesting to me is just last year, we didn't have enough storage capacity to store all the oil that we were producing. But just in the last month, it's gone negative. And so we are starting to draw out of our stores. Now we've got a lot, 3 billion barrels in storage, but we're beginning to draw it down instead of contribute to. So just what he said has happened. We tipped it, and now we're in the negative. And a lot of it is due to what's happening in Venezuela, Nigeria, and other places. So that's good news. For the first time, we're seeing oil go up. So perhaps we're getting to that point. Now then I was reading Wall Street Journal, and I found out that we don't count very well. In fact, we don't know where 800,000, now remember, we're only 1 million plus, and now we're just slightly negative. We don't know where 800,000 barrels is every day. You know, you would think that we could figure out how much oil's coming out of the ground and going into tankers and so forth. We don't know. So the accounting across the world is missing every single day 800,000 barrels. So here's Wall Street Journal.
While oil prices are making a bit of a rebound this week, they continue to linger in record low territory due to oversupply in the market. But just how big is the glut? Wall Street Journal reports that as many as 800,000 barrels of oil a day are unaccounted for. Here to discuss the mystery of the missing oil is Wall Street Journal reporter Georgie Konchev from our London bureau. Good to see you, Georgie.
Good to see you too.
So how do 800,000 barrels of oil go just completely missing? Isn't that watched for? Isn't that monitored very closely?
Yes, it is monitored pretty closely. The International Energy Agency, which is a top global monitor, is looking at supply and demand. But this data is based on estimates. So, for example, last year, it estimated that on a daily basis, there's 2 million barrels a day more supply than there's demand for. Now, out of these 2 million, roughly 2 million, about 1.1 million barrels a day are accounted for. These are in storage or in transit, in pipelines. And that leaves about 800,000, which we don't know where they are. Now, it doesn't mean that these are necessarily non-existing barrels. They could be in places that the IEA doesn't monitor. It could be in China, it could be in other countries. But the IEA also says that they, and they're very transparent about it, they say that they could be overestimating supply or underestimating demand, meaning some of these barrels could actually be, they couldn't be real. And that leaves the oversupply, which we think it's 2 million barrels a day, actually could be smaller.
So, add that all up. We're right on the edge. And it appears now, if 800,000 barrels goes missing every day, that we are actually in better shape than we thought we were in terms of balancing supply and demand. And so now we're beginning for the first time to see the development of shale again. But this time, we're coming in with investors who are not debt-laden because they're buying it at 10 cents on the dollar from those who went under. And guess what? We can now begin to get oil out efficiently at $50. In fact, there's a new kind of shale play that's much more environmentally friendly and much more efficient, using the water over and over again instead of trying to treat it every time, making multiple wells from one site, in fact, making lots of wells from one site. And so we can get up to maybe 100 wells in one site. And the statement now is we can make money at 50. And so as I've been watching the rig count, it's beginning to come up again. And that's good news for our industry, because about $800 million will be spent on every one of these sites. So I think the worst case scenario is now beginning to be passed. But we still have major layoffs happening because of the flywheel effect. So what's our future? The future looks like this. Global rig count's down, but a little bit of an uptick here. When $100 barrel oil is in, everybody makes money. At $50, only the smart people make money, those who are really going at it in a smart way. That's where we come in. On the Middle East, it's a little bit different because of the idea that they need as much oil as they can for infrastructure. They are continuing to invest in countries like Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, in United Arab Emirates. Add to that what happened in Paris at the COP21, and there is a huge demand for engineering. Now, I've been talking about oil, but there's a flip side to this, because if this is going to play, then you're going to see some major changes in this industry. Up to now, we've relied a lot on nuclear energy, and we've relied a lot on coal. How many coal plants are being built in the United States right now? How many coal plants are being shut down in the United States right now? Because with gas at $250 or 1,000, these combined cycle units are going to be replacing all this. I can just remember a couple of years ago during the Enron fiasco when combined cycle units were used as peakers. Everybody remember that? Taking the heavy load in the summer when the heat is on down here and in the winter up in the north. But now all of a sudden these are the base load units because these are coming offline and these are being decommissioned. There's an area there that not too many people pay attention to. If you're going to use this as your solid demand and your base load, what is the missing element here? It's called midstream. There's not enough pipe capacity to carry all this gas to all of these new combined cycle units that are being built all over. While we were at CERAWeek, they have these breakfast breakouts. I went into the gas breakfast breakout, and there was a midstream partner that was talking about how much it costs to put a pipe underneath the Hudson River. It was about $3 billion to put one pipe under the Hudson River. Nobody wants a pipeline in their backyard anymore, and so the regulatory requirements are enormous, and this is becoming the bottleneck. Because in the Northeast, all of a sudden, the customer has priority 1 for heating. These have priority 2. So if you have you have one of those polar vortexes that come down, and everybody's got their thermostat set on 75 trying to keep their house warm, and you're consuming all the capacity of the pipeline, there's no excess capacity for generation, the generators shut down. We don't have enough pipeline. So there's a great opportunity to build infrastructure in North America to supply the new energy thing. So you add the good part, and if you're in chemicals like Huntsman or whatever, and you're using natural gas as your supply, all of a sudden we see a shift now in business. And some of the people in this room are feeling pretty good, and they're saying, what are you talking about, worst case scenario? It's never been so good. If you're in pipelines, it's good. If you're in chemicals, it's good. And if you're in pharmaceuticals in this research triangle, it's good. And so I started out with a roller coaster, and I've come back to the roller coaster. Here's a dad and his little daughter who are sitting on a roller coaster. One's experiencing ecstasy. It used to be cool. What's it called now? Epic. One's having an epic experience, and the other one's a worst case scenario. Figure out which one you are. So who's the dad? All right, so I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, all right, in my career I've seen this sine wave come and go, and as you heard from Jim, I transitioned out of engineering about 10 years ago into the ministry, and yet I still had a foot left in the industry speaking like this. And so periodically, my presentations get mixed up. And that's on purpose, actually. And I came across a poem as I was developing a sermon, and I thought, man, this nails it for our industry. It's by a guy named Thomas Bailey Aldrich, and I think it nails it so well, because as I first started my career and the industry was doing well, I was enthusiastic. I had these great dreams for my future. And Aldrich says, in youth beside the lonely sea, voices and visions came to me. They followed me from street to street, the dreams that made my boyhood sweet. Now one by one the visions fly, and one by one the voices die. More distantly the accents ring, more frequent the receding wing. And then the last stanza is the one that just gets me. Full dark shall be the days in store when voice and vision come no more. We don't want to be in that position, because when you go into a worst case scenario, oftentimes you go into depression. You think, oh, I've lost my job, I've lost my identity, I've lost my significance. And pretty soon, full dark shall be the days in store when voice and vision come no more. As we walked in here today, we got little cards, and on there was a vision for ISA. It's a vision for our industry. Let's not lose our voice. Let's not lose our vision. And so I thought about the presentation today, and I thought, let's have a two-point presentation. Let's talk about our voice, and let's talk about our vision. How are we going to talk and encourage an industry that's in the depths of depression right now, thinking this is the worst-case scenario? So I'm going to be speaking about both our voice and our vision. I picked up a book not long ago called The Soft Edge. It's written by a guy named Rich Karlgaard. He is the managing editor of Forbes magazine. I actually met him and talked to him after I read the book. I thought I'll just write the guy. I thought this is a really seminal book. I really want to meet the guy, and I did because he answered me, which I never thought he would. I'm just this simple little speaker that gets invited to events like this. I'm not this megastar. And so, but he answered me, and we had this wonderful conversation. But the essence of the book, and that's what I'm going to complete my presentation with, is that every successful company has three sides to it, a three-sided triangle. And the first side is the hard edge. This is the piece that has your product. It's your engineering services. It's your operations piece. Companies like the one I work for, Emerson, pride themselves in this hard edge. We started out making little electric motors, and the idea was we were the best cost producer. And that was our whole mantra, is being able to take cost out of processes. So we bought InSinkErator. You probably have one of those garbage disposals, because that's the #1 garbage disposal. And you've got closet-made hanger things and your organizers in your closet, and you might have a Trane air conditioner, but it's got a Copeland compressor in it. It's all about that for us. And then what Karlgaard says is there's another part that is required, and that's a marketing part, getting the story out, talking about being cool. Well, used to be cool. And then you have an administration that does the capital acquisition, getting money on Wall Street to fund all the expansions, to get the acquisitions going, to do HR. Companies that are successful have these two sides. But most companies, according to Karlgaard, miss the soft edge. And he says, everybody's good here now. Used to be that there was a big difference between these various companies on this, but those companies that don't have good products and don't have good services, they don't exist anymore. And those companies that don't have good marketing, getting the story out, and they don't have good HR practices, they don't exist anymore. So most companies have these two nailed. But what Karlgaard said is that there's another side, and that side is the voice. the voice of how you actually get your message out. And that comes in a number of different ways. He says that it starts with trust. When you go to Amazon today, which is where a lot of us are buying things these days, what is the first thing you do before you buy something? You look at the customer testimonials. That's how you determine whether you should buy that product or not. I read about 8 or 10 of them, and I go back a ways so that I'm not being influenced by the ones they want to be on the top. And I read about the product because I have to trust what I don't see in order to buy from Amazon. I can't touch it, I can't feel it. I have to trust, and I trust those testimonials. Second is smarts. How smart are we in delivering our message? And I'm going to show you that it's more than IQ. It's much more than IQ. And the teams. How important are the teams of your organization? How important are the employees? Are they just names, numbers? Taste. I'm going to show you that the product has to look good. Apple has managed to do this very well. And then story. How do you tell your message? We're talking about getting the message out. And today, people don't want facts and figures. Every fact and figure is available in your pocket. We don't disseminate information anymore. We are now communicating through story. How did that product affect me? So, now that I've got your attention, I'm going to give you a quiz just to wake you up a little bit, because I see a couple are beginning to nod. So we're going to get a little quiz. Here's the quiz. I want you to name this company as I develop these clues one by one. So the blank company has been creating ideas and breakthroughs for well over a century. Now, the only clue you see there is that the company is over 100 years old. So let's go to the next clue. They invented grammar checkers. Any ideas yet? Microsoft isn't 100 years old. Gates may look 100 years old, but he's not 100 years old. IBM is a good guess. Not the right one, but a great guess. GE, great guess, but no. Xerox, wonderful guess, wrong. Webster's, oh, that's a good one, grammar checkers. All right, let's try and move, because that's wrong too. They invented the electronic dictionary in '85. Now you're gun shy. They invented the laptop word processor in 1989. Texas Instruments. Wang, I heard Wang. They invented PDAs in '94. Anybody still have a Palm Pilot? I'm moving from Marshalltown to Richmond, Virginia, and I'm cleaning out my office, and I found my Palm Pilot. I was wondering if I put it on eBay, can I sell it? I don't think so. Okay. Adobe, Hewlett Packard. The answer is Smith Corona. You said it. I heard it. I just didn't want to acknowledge it because then it blew my presentation. You're the first person I've ever presented this to that guessed it, by the way. That's because you heard me once before, right? Smith Corona, yeah. Very interesting. They've taken this down from their website now. But when I first investigated this, I went to what was the remains of the Smith Corona website, and I found this statement. On the 8th day, God created Smith Corona. You know, being a theology major, that's pretty high up there on the sustainability category, right? They had the gall to say that they thought they were that important and that enduring. That God, when he was finished with this world, created Smith Corona, and they'll be here forever. And yeah, I don't think so. And so they do have a storied history, a great history. Back in the 1800s, they invented this double-barrel shotgun that was kind of the envy of every bird hunter. And then by 1942, they had the tallest building in Seattle for their office building. And then by 1995, they declared bankruptcy the first time. By 2000, they declared it the second time. And all that's left of Smith Corona, that storied company, is pressure-sensitive tape. That was the only acquisition they made that's left, and it's been acquired. And yet, they had this wonderful legacy of products. So they had the first machine with upper and lowercase letters where you could push the shift key and get to the uppercase letters. In 27, they had an adding machine where you could pull the crank. And then 57, they invented the first portable electric typewriter. This is coming into my era. Thanks, Jim. By 73, there was this wonderful invention. Instead of taking those little spools of that carbon ribbon and trying to feed it through, you could just put the cartridge in here. And then how about this? We could have different fonts. That was really cool. And so then by 1989, they developed this laptop word processor, and I had one of these. And when I was in college, remember the erasable, none of you do, the erasable bond paper that we used for term papers because we made mistakes? And they developed this great little thing that the sentence would appear in this window, and if you liked it, you push print. And you could change what was in that little window before it hit the paper, one sentence at a time. And then in 1990, they decided to partner with a computer company called Acer, and they decided very quickly that that wasn't going to work because these were clunky and not very useful. So they partnered with Microsoft, and that was where the grammar checker came from, so that you could get a flag in the little window if the grammar was wrong. And then by 2012, they're just printing labels. So what happened here? Well, in 1989, they were worth $500 million. And they said, if any of these guys ever develop into anything, we'll just buy them. You know, because there was this Apple, or the Apple II, or there, and the Amiga. Anybody have an Amiga? I loved that thing. I had 4 of them. And because I could do graphics and all that. And then anybody have an Osborne? Wasn't that a great thing? That was called the luggable. And you could put it in the overhead thing of the plane. You couldn't take anything else, but you could put this in the overhead. And it had this little phosphor yellow screen right there. That was cool. And what Smith Corona decided is we'll just buy one of those guys. And the other thing that got to them was their main competitor would be who? Remington. And Remington went down the path of the big computer, and so they bought into the mainframe. That's a real mainframe, by the way. And by 1981, that caused them to go bankrupt. But what's interesting to me is their CEO, G. Lee Thompson, made this statement just 3 years before they declared bankruptcy. And this is how out of touch he was. Many people believe that the typewriter and the word processing business is a buggy whip industry, which is far from true. There's still a strong market for our products in the United States and in the world. That's CEO G. Lee Thompson. And 3 years later, he was out of business. Now that is complete disconnect from reality. And I think we're seeing a lot of that in our industry. We're seeing people who thought that oil was going to be at $100 a barrel plus forever. They didn't make contingencies. They didn't have a worst case scenario survival handbook. And so thousands of workers are being laid off. Warren Buffett has sold his shares in ExxonMobil because he's not sure about that anymore. Shell lays off 10,000. You can read the newspapers daily about how many layoffs are happening and continuing to happen. In addition, I was reading The Economist, and it said big acquisitions could take place, and they called this blood in the water, where Exxon could swallow BP. You know, it's happened, right? We saw Exxon buy XTO and others. So big things could indeed happen. So our goal now is to figure out how to prosper in these difficult times. And the triangle is important. So I'll take you back in the day, 1857, and if Jim was right, I remember this. There was a military man, and he's a major. His name is Major John Sedgwick, and he had a problem. He was just graduated from West Point. My nephew graduated this year from West Point. It's a big deal. And so he had just graduated. He knows all the answers. And he has this regiment that's been assigned to him, and he's to be out there in the National Guard in Kansas. And it's 1857, and he feels the ground shaking. And over the horizon, he sees this dust cloud. And he thinks, oh no, here we are at Little Bighorn again. And this time, I'm going to use my West Point training, and I won't be General Custer. So he's trying to muster his troops for what appears is going to be the Indians coming over the crest of the hill. But it isn't Indians, it's buffalo. Buffalo for as far as he can see from east to west. He's never been trained in West Point how to deal with a charge of buffalo coming over the crest. He doesn't know what to do. It looks like his wagons will be trampled, his men will be trampled, and they will suffer defeat to buffalo, not to Indians. And so there's a lowly private that says, Major Sedgwick, if you'll just listen to me, I've got the answer. He says, what's the answer? He says, we have to form ourselves into a triangle, and we will put guns on the sides of the triangle, and all of us will aim at the buffalo right in the front. And what'll happen is one buffalo after another will die, a pile of buffaloes will develop, and the herd will split. Sedgwick listened, and he lived. So what we have to do is listen to everyone in our organization, because everyone in our organization can help us to develop this soft side of the triangle. And that's our voice. So let me start. The first thing we have to understand is our companies today are not listening very well. In fact, the studies show that only 1 in 5 employees are engaged. That means 80% of our employees would rather be somewhere else than at work. They're just punching a clock. They have no initiative. They're not excited about their job. They don't get any significance from their job. They're there because they have to be. And if you've got 80% of your employees who are disengaged, you will fail. And Karlgaard says that. In fact, Fortune magazine said this: more than a third of the companies are so dysfunctional. The best people don't really care about what they're doing, and the worst people don't know that they're doing a lousy job. These are the findings of a new study by Leadership IQ, a 12-year-old Washington, D.C. company that does employee engagement surveys. So we have this mass of people who are disengaged. We got to figure out how to fix that. And I think it all started way back with a guy named Winslow Taylor. Does anybody ever when you were in college, did you ever study Winslow Taylor? He's the author of the structure that we use to run businesses today. Everything's changed in our businesses except how they're organized. We still have these triangles, and we still have this division of labor, because Winslow Taylor said there are people who can design a process and people who are too dumb to design it, so they have to work it. And he made this statement. This is so unbelievable, I have to quote it. And he made this statement to a congressional committee. I can say without the slightest hesitation, he told this congressional committee, that the science of handling pig iron is so great, so complex, that the man who is physically able to handle it, he's too stupid to choose a higher element for his occupation. Really? Do we really have this division of labor like this? Indeed we do. Because in the old days, we had people where you had the master and you had the apprentice. And those people think and do. But under Winslow Taylor, he split it. And we have the thinkers and the doers. And that worked for a long time. When Henry Ford was around with his assembly line, that worked. We are in the information age, and it don't work no longer. It doesn't work anymore. And so that has to come back together. We have to have thinkers and doers all through our organization. And I heard Jim talk about Peter Drucker. He's one of my favorite authors. Passed away around the year 2000 at about, 99? But his last book was Business in the 21st Century, and there was a statement in the book that I read that just floored me. And that statement was this: management is doing things right. Leadership is doing the right things. What Drucker's doing is he's taking Winslow Taylor, he says there's those two layers, management and leadership. And he's saying managers, they figure out how to do things right, efficiently, etc., but they may be doing the wrong things, a la Smith Corona. So I'll put it this way. Here's management. They're tasked to do things right. And so they sit around their table, might have one guy from the plant, their token guy from the plant. And they create this business that runs efficiently. They've got a great HR department. They've got the right throughput. They're looking at inventory levels, work in process, how many days sales in receivable. You got all those charts, EBITs and all that sort of thing. But what Drucker says is you need an equal and opposite force, and that force says, hey, I understand you're trying to do things right, but you better be doing the right things. And what Drucker says is there needs to be fierce arguments within a company. And these two opposing forces have to be yelling and screaming at each other because these guys won't do the right things unless these guys tell them. And what I'm realizing is that the businesses that we're in are so complex these days that these people in the plant, their vision starts to go down. I remember when I got into seminary, and I just got out of graduate school, or engineering school, and now I'm in seminary. And I'm sitting in this class, and my homiletics professor is saying, some of you folks are going to have the unfortunate experience of having engineers in your congregation. All right? What's the problem with that? He says, those guys, and he said guys, are so narrow-minded they can see through a keyhole with both eyes. And that's what happens. You start to become myopic if you're in the plant and that's all you see. So what these people need is a little help from the outside. They need some vision from the outside. And when that happens, then we can do the right things. Now, I'm looking at this and seeing that we've laid off 500,000 people, 500 million people, 500,000 people. And so there's lots of vacancies here. And we need to help fill that information gap with this organization. And we got it here this morning, right here. Content, data, coolest presentations. I like it, I'm old. I'm going to stay with coolest. And with cybersecurity and advocacy, because these people here are missing that. So I think we are now the worst case scenario survival handbook. That's what ISA is. I don't know if that plays, Pat, but now we're going to take you down this stream and then I'll be done. The first thing I want to talk about is trust. There are more and more studies that are coming along that say this whole idea of the shareholder comes first, then the customer, then finally the employees, that's wrong. Indeed, the companies that are succeeding the best are the ones where the customer comes second and the shareholder comes third. Because if you take care of your internal employees, then they have esprit de corps, they have enthusiasm. It's not the 80-20 where 80% of the people don't wish they were there. Now everybody's glad they're there, they're working together, and external customers are taken care of. In fact, one of the reasons that I could retire early is because I started to invest only in companies that treated their employees well. So every year, Fortune comes out with their top 50 companies on the people where it's the best place to work. And I'll just be transparent. This is my last speech, by the way. I'm retiring. So I can say anything now. Nobody cares. I remember as about 15 years ago, I had an opportunity with one of my colleagues to call on Valero. So here I am in San Antonio. Anybody Valero here? Is anybody Valero? Good, I can say anything. All right, I walked in Valero, and at that time they only had 10 refineries. They hadn't bought Altamar, Dow, and Shamrock yet and become the nation's largest refiner. And so I saw something there. Oh man. Greehey was the CEO, and he was a guy that engaged with everybody. And when the floods came and the hurricane came down into the Gulf Coast, he was down there working in the refineries with the people. He was flipping hamburgers on a grill. He gave $10,000 to every employee that lost a home. He gave free gasoline to all the employees to help them in the crisis, and the people loved him. And I looked at this and I said, oh man, this is great. So I called my broker on the way out and I said, I'm buying these shares. He said, you're crazy, that's a refiner. I said, I know, but I like this company. Well, over the next 3 years, it went 10x in value. I quit Emerson and I went into the ministry because Valero put their employees first. And I've been investing that way ever since. Some haven't panned out quite the way I thought, but I can retire. All right, so that's important. And customers that do that, they win. Next, I'll just talk about happy workers because USA said that. They said that the companies on the Fortune 100, they're the ones that have the lowest turnover. All right, next is smarts. I always thought that smarts were if you went to Cornell or you went to Harvard or you did that. And the studies show that that's not true. In fact, a lot of those people have been insulated from reality. I hired McKinsey once, paid them $1 million to tell me what I already knew. It's kind of like the definition of a consultant, right? You ask them what time it is, they say, can I borrow your watch? And then afterwards they keep your watch. What Karlgaard said was he went in and he investigated in a Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance, and he found out that the salespeople that make the most calls have the most success. Well, that's duh. I mean, that should be the law of averages. But he found out it's much deeper than that. Every time a door is slammed in a salesperson's face, they learn something. And that's a learning experience that makes them sharper for the next time. And companies that celebrate failure and celebrate people who try hard are more successful than the companies that celebrate success. And it works. And so at Northwestern Mutual Life, the people who have the most calls and the most slammed doors are the ones that produce the most. And also, there's a very good story there where this one salesman thought all I do is sell life insurance. It doesn't mean anything until he was invited to the funeral of a mother whose 12-year-old daughter was now by herself. And one of the family friends said, it's okay, she doesn't have to worry because there's a life insurance policy in place. He said all of a sudden significance was key on helping 12-year-old girls to be prepared for the worst case scenario. Next, teams. Teams have been around a long time. In fact, way back in the mastodon elephant time, you can't bring down a mastodon elephant by yourself, and so teams were formed. But in corporations like the one I live in, teams are about the size of the people in this room. And pretty soon you got all kinds of opinions and nothing gets done. And we spin wheels forever and ever. But Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, said, you have to have the 2 pizza rule for teams. If your team is bigger than 2 pizzas can feed for lunch, your team is too big. I think that's true. I found in my experience that big teams don't accomplish anything. Little teams do. And then what Karlgaard said is that you need diversity on the team. And what he meant was not diversity like a number of different ethnic groups, not women versus or plus men. He said it's cognitive diversity. You've got to have people who are thinking differently. You've got to have people that are in there with Bubba on their shirt, and they're taking their Nomex suit off and their hard hat off. You've got to have cognitive diversity. Then there's shared leadership. The leadership has to rotate through the committee, and then team spirit. If you've got Eeyore on your team, get him off. Anybody remember the 100-Acre Wood? Yeah, you don't need Eeyore on your team. So, next is passion. That comes right off of Eeyore. You've got to be passionate and love the project. You've got to be willing to take risks. Negativism isn't allowed. And then true grit. I just read in a Wall Street Journal this week that there's this new mantra for raising kids. Used to be, we gave them a trophy for participating, and it was encourage, encourage, encourage. Now they realize that that doesn't work because when they get to college, they said, well, you know, it should all be given to me. So now it's all about true grit. And so John Wayne is back. And that's, now all of a sudden it's the Asia mom, the super mom, which is probably not right either. But there's got to be a balance. But true grit is important. You can't give up. So innovation is not turning money into ideas. Innovation is turning ideas into money. And finally, the taste. My son works for Apple. Apple has done a wonderful job of taste. I mean, their products are way expensive. I remember when I told my son that I was going to be going on to this speaking thing, and I said, what computer should I buy? He said, Apple. I said, it's too expensive. He said, what are you going to do for a living? I said, speak. He says, well, then you need somebody that can support you because you won't have an IT department. So I have this Apple Care thing, and it's done well. And so that's why I do that. But all through the history, we've seen things like the American Motors Pacer, or this is a Yugo. I was living in Germany when the wall came down, and these plastic body 2-cylinder, 2-cycle cars came over onto German autobahns. That was an experience. Because we're driving at about 180 kilometers per hour, and you cross over a hill and you see this thing spewing smoke out, and he's going 30. So there were these long black marks on the Autobahn as the Mercedes and the BMWs had to apply full brakes to keep from hitting. And it was so bad that the German government specified that these had to be off the road within 6 months. So you can find them in a museum somewhere. The other thing is an understanding of your customer. When Coca-Cola decided to come out with the first Diet Cola, they came out with this one, a pink tab. How many guys at a Steelers tailgate party would be caught dead drinking cola out of a paint can. It didn't work with guys. And Coke decided, let's be neutral, and they came out with Diet Coke, which is basically the same thing as that. And it helped a little, but not a lot. And so now they decided, let's go one more step, and we'll do Coke Zero. And Coke Zero is aimed at tailgate guys with guts that come out to here. All right? And if you watch the advertisements on television, it's always guys, it's always sports related, and they're drinking Coke Zero because Coca-Cola figured out their target audience. And they want more than women to drink Diet Cola. They want everybody to drink Diet Cola. All right. Finally, it's your presentation. I went to seminary and I took this course called homiletics, which is the theory of preaching. And in homiletics, they teach you how to put a speech together. And most engineers face audiences that look like that. We put the audience into the third stage of anesthesia. We might as well be anesthesiologists. We're really good at this with our bullet points, our lists, and all of this. And when we come to the end of our time, we get a pink card that says, your time is up. So very briefly, I'm going to talk to you about this part called story. How are you going to deliver your message? This is a true confession. I graduated in my class of 398 in high school, 396th. It's pretty close to the bottom. I had two guys underneath me, but they were underneath me, okay. As my French teacher walked down, and I was in my cap and gown, she leaned over and she said, good luck in life. Because I learned bonjour the day I walked in, and I learned au revoir the day I walked out, and nothing in between. And that worked out until I was in Paris one night, late night. I got into Charles de Gaulle. I get into this taxi. I tell him I want to go to our Honeywell office. Back then I worked for Honeywell, and it's not too far from Versailles. He couldn't find it. At 11:30 at night, he threw me out of the cab with my bags on the curb, and he said something in French that I didn't understand. And now I'm in the middle of France, and all I know is bonjour and au revoir. All right, so I thought about this, and I thought there are really three ways to communicate. Number one is to teach your solution to people. You have the answers, and you're going to just force feed it into your people. I know a lot of preachers like this, right? We know all the answers, and we just spew forth our knowledge. There's a second and more effective way, and that's to teach people your solution. I don't know if you see the nuance there. Teach your solution to people. Solution comes before people. In this one, teach people your solution. You have to understand their need before you provide your solution. But there's a last one and a better one, and that is, let's see if we can find a solution together. I think ISA is there. If you're trying to do this, this is what it looks like. And we as engineers are really good at this. We have the solution, we're going to data dump it in, and the people are bored to tears. Now I'm going to show you two very effective communicators, and I'm going to ask you which one communicates better. Both are successful, by the way. Here's Bill Gates over here. These are his slides. This is Steve Jobs' slide. Who's more effective at communicating? I mean, Bill Gates often said, you're a much better marketing person than me. I'm a better engineer, but you're a much better marketing person. And that's true. So it's time to tell you a little story to show you how this works when you are presenting your solution to people. I'm going to take you back to 2010. There was an earthquake in Haiti. It was a horrible situation. And in fact, about 150,000 people died. 500,000 people were severely injured. And there was a doctor, his name was Dr. McLaughlin, and he was a gastroenterologist. Those are the people that make quite a bit of money. And he had his practice down in Miami. And he had an airplane called a Cirrus 22. Does anybody know what's specifically unique about a Cirrus 22? They have a parachute. For the pilot? No, for the plane, yes. These are not cheap airplanes. They're rather, if you're a pilot, any pilots here? Yes, you know that they're rather pricey, right? Yeah, kind of pricey. And he had one, and he was flying back and forth, and he was taking supplies into Haiti. He was on, I guess, about his 50th or 60th trip. He took his daughter with him, and he's now in the Bermuda Triangle, heading from Miami to Haiti, and all of a sudden he sees the oil pressure go like this. And he had enough presence of mind to pull the handle, and guess what? There was a Coast Guard ship that wasn't far from that, and they filmed it. And so here it is.
A rare sight caught on camera as a single-engine plane came to a rest in the ocean after being lowered from the sky by a parachute. Pilot ran out of fuel off the coast of Maui. Coast Guard recorded this video. The plane's manufacturer is Cirrus, and among private pilots, they're known as a high-performance, high-price tag aircraft. But this SR-22 model does have a built-in parachute, which we can thank in this case for the pilot being able to climb out of the cockpit in one piece. He was picked up by a passing Holland America cruise ship.
What's interesting about that is that Brian Williams was in the back seat of that plane. I see you have good memories. So, what was unique about this? Why am I telling this story? You see the plane go down. There's Dr. McLaughlin and his daughter floating in the life raft. They're saved. And there was a problem in the Cirrus organization because the corporation was making this sophisticated plane, but people weren't pulling the handle in time. And their accident ratio was no better than a plane without a parachute. And so the Pilots Association got together and said, you know, if the oil pressure goes, pull the handle before it hits the water. Because that's why you bought the plane. And Cirrus said, no, we don't want that because it shows that our planes can crash, that there's problems with our planes. And they said, no, this will be your selling feature. And so there was this tussle back and forth. This is management doing things the right way. This is the pilots say, wait a minute, let's do the right thing. And so that's the kind of story that you can tell. Whenever you tell a story, whenever you are into a delivery, the first thing you have to do is to show something that's in balance and then goes to crisis. So he's flying back and forth, but then he has a crisis. The oil pressure goes down. All good stories have an antagonist. All good stories have a crisis. You have to declare the crisis. You have to show your customer what the problem is, and then you have to show a conquering hero. All good stories do that, and your presentation should as well. And when you do that, don't do data dumps. Don't do slides like that. Do slides with stories. I'm pretty much done, but because this is my last speech, I'm going to launch into something else. And this is important for you personally. Because there's going to come a time when you face your own personal worst case scenario. And you need a survival handbook. This goes beyond your company. This is about you personally. And so for the next couple of minutes, I'm going to talk about that. I promise not to be sectarian, but I think you need to hear this message. And so there will come a time when everything kind of falls apart on you. There will be a divorce. There will be the death of a spouse. There will be the death of a child. And there's no worst case scenario survival handbook for this. And all of a sudden, your whole world will be shaken. Your significance will be tested. And you need something to hang on to. And so I think that is faith. And there's a dearth of that today. The statistics I read is that more and more of the people in our country have left faith behind. They've put all their trust in their own abilities. And if you do that, I guarantee you that at some point in your life, you're going to meet your worst case scenario. And you're going to need a survival handbook. And you're going to need some faith. It happened to the best of us. It happened to Steve Jobs. It happens to everybody. Not long ago, I had an opportunity to present to BP, and we had a manager. His name was Jim Tucker, and Jim Tucker was the manager of our Beaumont facility. And Jim's a wonderful guy. Anybody remember Jim Tucker? One or two. He retired about, I guess, 10 years ago now, and he moved outside of Beaumont, and they built this beautiful house. It's not big, it's just nice. And he and his wife, Becky, planned the whole thing. And no sooner was it finished that Becky developed a very strong illness that took her life in the matter of months. And Jim was devastated because now he lives out in the middle of the country. And I was out there visiting him, and he has this gorgeous house on about 20 acres, and he built this pond here. And every day he goes out and he feeds the fish in the pond. And as we rode his little gator around the side, the fish must sense the vibrations because the whole pond began to shiver. And as we fed the fish, this is what it looked like. And these catfish are like this. And so if you want to catch fish, you could just throw something in there. It'd be seconds, and you'd have something like this on the line. But Jim wasn't taking care of himself. He didn't get a colonoscopy when he turned 50, and all of a sudden he saw something in his stool that didn't look right. He went to the doctor. He's got stage 4 colon cancer. Now he's making multiple trips over to MD Anderson. He's got a big section of his colon that was taken out, and it's now in his lymph nodes, and it's in his liver, and it's not looking good. And so I said, Jim, how are you sustaining life? He said, it's my faith, Dave. That's all I got left, is my faith. So I want to just share something with you. You got to hang on to something. And that means that you're going to have to set aside some time in your life. I read this article in the New Yorker, and there's this author, her name is Judah Shulevitz, and obviously you can tell from her name that she's Jewish. She was raised in a strong Jewish home, and she abandoned her faith. And all of a sudden she realized that her life was kind of closing in on her. It was cratering, and she was overworked, and she was busy, and she wrote this book called The Sabbath World. And what Shulevitz said is that no matter how many vacations she took, there was something missing in her life. There was this emptiness, this void that needed to be filled. And so she said this, not even our group leisure activities can do for us what Sabbath rituals could once be counted on to do. Religious rituals do not exist simply to promote togetherness. They are designed to convey to us a certain story about who we are. I think that once a week, we need to stop looking on the horizontal, and we better start looking at the vertical. In my experience, the guy who graduated second to the last in his class, that ended up as a senior vice president for Emerson, who talks to the CEO, I don't know how that happened, except that one day a week, I think about the eternal, and that creates a creativity inside of me that I don't have with other colleagues, because they are focused like this and they can see through a keyhole with both eyes. You need to be put in your place. You need to see the eternal. I'm not telling you which religion to follow. I'm just saying you need that. And if you don't have that, you will be like this. You will have a spiritual exhaustion. Your creativity will dry up. We were created in His image. He is the master creator. You want creativity? Plug into Him. Once in a while, plug into Him. And you will fix the physical exhaustion. You'll fix the spiritual exhaustion. There are people who haven't. Audrey McClendon built Chesapeake, and then he rammed his car into that post at roughly 80 miles an hour, because in the end, he had nothing. I have a little clip from Squawk Box where David Faber, I don't know if I have time to play it, says that by the time McClendon drove his car into there, he didn't have enough money to pay for a lawyer to defend him. Here he is.
Thank you very much, Scott. Of course, you hit on some of the key points here. Mr. McClendon, no doubt a pioneer in many ways, beginning in 1989 and buying up vast tracts of land, really introducing the idea of the use of fracking for natural gas, and in a sense creating the environment that led to significant financial losses down the road, given the abundance of natural gas in this country. Specific to yesterday's events, Mr. McClendon was supposed to present himself, to turn himself in at about 11 a.m. He got in the crash somewhere around 9 in the morning, I believe it was, perhaps a bit later, but never, of course, made it to that designated time to turn himself in. In speaking to a number of people over the last, late yesterday and this morning, who were both his friends and his financiers and people who were involved in his business life, they describe it as Scott said, so many ups and so many downs. At one point, a billionaire. Most recently, though, having spent more than $10 billion in both equity and debt that had been raised, perhaps as much as 14, on his new company, American Energy Partners. This is the company he formed after leaving Chesapeake a couple of years ago. It wasn't clear that he had anything left. And in fact, the indictment itself may have really prevented him from accessing any other potential funding. People are not going to want to do business with you when you've been indicted, regardless of whether you're innocent or not. And it may simply have been the last straw. Again, we can't draw conclusions about the crash itself. He was a very generous man. Many people say that he'd been abandoned by many of his friends over the last few months. And it's not clear that if he had a report at 11 a.m. that he would have been able to even afford the bail to have gotten out of jail, or even a lawyer. So
he didn't even have enough for a lawyer. He needed significance in his life. He built his whole life around his company. He was so narrow-minded. All that was left was what he could see through a keyhole with both eyes. Didn't have enough money for a lawyer, and yet he was a billionaire at one time. In Iowa, every year they have these antique tractor fairs. And I'm always intrigued by what they start with and what they end with. And what they want to hear more than anything else when you come by their tractor is, wow, that is a job well done. And that's what we all want to hear in our careers. That's what we want people to say about us. Because we are in ISA, we are in our companies, and we are trying to help management to do the right things. And when they come back to us and say, well done, man, that feels good. And when you do, you'll realize that that is the worst case scenario survival handbook. And we'll take this new reality and turn it into a new opportunity. Thanks a lot for your attention.